Hello all, Tmzoids here. And before I get into my topic today, I just wanted to say I'm sorry or I apologize for taking breaks or pauses in between the conversation here. We're taking a drink because my throat's been a little sore and scratchy lately. It's because of the weather changes. It's all over the map. One day it's 70 degrees outside and it's nice and you can wear a sweatshirt, and the next day it's snowing, so my body's like, it's cold outside now. It's messing up my throat, so I apologize. But today's topic I wanted to talk about is the dangerous path that we're going down when it comes to designing champions or talking about redoing or looking at champion kits to make them more viable for the meta or make them more viable for gameplay to see them more within a more favorable pick. Now, I say this because I feel like the community and Riot has both endorsed a meta or an idea where everything needs to be movement, or you have to have some kind of mobility, or you have to be safe. If you're mobile and you're moving, you're safe. You're always moving. You can't really be touched. You have great escape. You have great engage. All of this comes into play, and I feel like this has come into Riot's head with the last couple champions that have been made, and it has come into the head of the community really bad when it's looking at how to redo kits and how to uh, with future champions too. And we'll start with Riot's side first. So if you look back at a few of the champions they've made within 2014 and 2015, because if you're just looking at 2015, it's just Bard, but several champions that they've made within this era or meta has really encouraged this idea of mobility, safe movement, always moving, never really can be caught out ordeal. I mean, they can be caught out, but you have enough disengage if you need to, and you can play safe enough, and you have enough engage and mobility to keep up and do what you need to do. What do I mean by that? Well, we can take Bard for example. He's the most recent champion released, which is a support in the League of Legends, and right off the bat, they admit it. He's the most roaming support that you can go out there, which I guess would fit Lust Boy style in retrospect, but that's besides the point. But they place charms randomly throughout the map, and they encourage you to go get those charms to buff up your little minions that follow you around. You get every five you get a little buff to your minions. So, it encourages you to move and be mobile and keep um, going ganking and changing lanes and go and collect those charms. You go back to 2014, there's multiple champions that have great mobility, and the one that really stands out of all of them is Callista. Callista is a pain in my neck, and with everything said and done, she's very mobile. She's like a mini Vayne with steroids. Like her passive is just Vayne. It's like I'm Vayne with spears though. But no, she hops around. She can easily disengage. She can go over the walls with her Q. Has a slow. She can, save a teammate with her ult. She can use her teammate as a sacrifice or a knockback or knock up. I mean, she just ultimately overall mobile. Take Exire or Gnar. Those are mobile champions. They're very safe. Quick champions, Gnar throws three auto attacks if he has his W and he gets a movement speed. He gets movement speed out of his ult. His ult is a big tanky guy with a lot of CC. Azir has two soldiers that pretty much fight for him. And Azir sits back and goes, "All right, I'll be here for you." And his soldiers dash ahead, and he can dash to his soldiers, and he's got a wall to protect him. And you have Rek'Sai and Braum. Rek'Sai, which is somewhat mobile, she's got his tunnels and she can move with her ult pretty much throughout the whole map. And then you have Braum, which is, somewhat mobile still. He can jump to players. He can move around. He can slow people. He can pretty much CC them down. And then you have Vel'Koz, which is probably the least mobile out of them all. He can slow them and he can knock people up, but I wouldn't put him in the same category as the others I've explained. So Riot has kind of endorsed this idea, or kind of fed to the meta idea of how you need to be mobile, you need to be a safe champion, or pick a safe champion to ultimately be successful within, just not as a professional LCS player, but also as, in solo queue. These are favorable picks that people want to pick because, you don't want to pick a champion that is easily caught out, or if you get, if somebody jumps on you like a jungler, such as Jarvan or Vi, you want to escape, you want a way to engage. And right now, just meta, how Riot has created champions have really made them very mobile, very accessible to, have great movement and keep moving, and uh, encourages you guys to pick these champions in a way because, it's like, oh, look at Bard, be a future Lust Boy, roam around, grab the charms. Look at, he gives movement speed every time he grabs a charm. So you can roam, so you can place health pots, you don't have to be with your partner, just place a health pot or two and boom, there you go, roam, and your health pots give you movement speed, a little bit movement speed. And just overall, you Kalista, just like I said, hopping around. And they really encourage and they kind of feed to this meta that, you know, non-mobile champions really have a hard time. You don't want to get caught out. You want to have a nice, be safe. Like I said, keywords here: mobility, safe. Riot endorses those, and they really work it into the champions they've made. And I think it's Riot's goal a little bit to kind of, down the line change this idea and hopefully ultimately change it and make it so a champion's not as mobile and a champion can be just as successful, which I'll point out a few at the end that are not as mobile but are just as successful right now in the meta. But those are mostly top laners, and there's one or two mid laners slash support we'll talk about. Not so much ADCs. But overall, I think Riot needs to kind of endorse and kind of get away from that meta. I think they've done a somewhat of a good job so far doing that. I think a lot of the main champions that you saw really took somewhat of a significant nerf. They took Azir out of the game, but pretty much he wasn't he could really snowball, but now he's kind of clunky and out of place. And other champions that were like your main assassins have changed and had nerfs to it, such as Fizz. Fizz was the mid lane god. He trickster every 2 seconds and kill you in 2 seconds, and now he's an AD bruiser top lane, which I'm sure they're looking at and working on. You have Ari with the change to her charm and the change to her Q. But going forward now, what I wanted to talk about is the community's idea of it. So now that Riot's kind of fed to that idea and kind of gives you that idea, I think the community kind of bounces and feeds off that as the only way to kind of rework champion or have it within a champion kit. And what do I mean by that? It's recently a lot of talk has been going on about Varus. Varus is probably one of the people that they want to see back in the meta. Everybody's giving ideas about Varus, and it seems like everybody wants to give Varus movement speed. It's just the thing to do. If he had movement speed, he would be so much better, and he would be mobile, and he can get away a little bit better. And I agree and I disagree. I mean, yes, the movement speed works well, and like I said, Riot caters to that, and everybody seems to be on that board. He has a few blight stacks on somebody, and he pops a Q, and he gets movement speed, and it will be 10 times better. But I feel like we need to think outside of the box, and we need to think more overall about his kit and how that champion functions within League of Legends and use that kit to the best of ability. Movement speed is not a bad idea, and I'm not saying, and this just doesn't have to do with Varus or for any champion. Movement speed's not bad, and it's a nice little quick thing which you can add in, and somehow they get a little movement speed or buff, and it could potentially save them. Sorry, I apologize. Potentially save them, or guarantee them a kill. But let's look at Varus. Sorry, I apologize. Specifically, and you have a few things that you can do with this kid. And I think this was on Reddit. One thing is, if he has a few blight stacks on him, one thing that you could do is just ultimately get a few blight stacks and pop an E on him. And that should, depending on how many blight stacks, decrease that champion that is chasing him movement speed, by so much. So if there's one blade stack, it's a percentage of, 5% for movement speed with one, two is 10%, and then three is like 15 or something. Something to that extent, something that incorporates this kit and just doesn't ultimately give him movement speed and make him just a speed demon. Because if we take this idea, let's take the idea of movement speed. So we get your blight stacks. Say we get 3 blight stacks and you get like a 10, we'll say 20% movement speed. That's kind of high. Maybe 15. 15%. So with Varus now that Riot has already changed the Varus, keep in mind the width of his ult has changed, which is not a big deal. I mean, it's wider, so it's easier to hit a little bit. But they've also changed his Q that people I don't think are incorporating in. Is as soon as you load up Varus's Q, boom, it starts to go on cooldown. And you ultimately can get over 4 seconds of free cooldown. And Varus's Q pretty much will be on a 3-second cooldown at max level, 3 to 4 seconds, depending on how things work. And this is bad because you're going to ultimately get Varus nerfed because I think he'll be too overpowered then. Because if you have a 4-second cooldown and you get 2 blight stacks off him, you're going to be all over the map. And you're like, well, Ahri has movement speed on her Q, but look at what has changed with Ahri overall. They had to change all her damage and how her kit works, and if you land a charm, it used to do extra damage. Now it's not really the case. They kind of took that away, and she's there and she's effective mid laner, but ultimately she took a lot of hits for it. And do you think Varus or other champions that are not as mobile that depend on that damage, depend on those blade stack damages and that Q damage to be nerfed or to be lessened because you want movement speed on a champion? And I think that's what the overall community isn't understanding, is that with movement speed you have to really be careful, because if you give them too much of a movement speed or too much of a mobility or safe play, they ultimately get nerfed. And I don't think Varus could take the nerf, honestly. He would just be right out back out of the meta because he'd be unplayable. Without the damage to his Q and the damage to his E, people wouldn't play Varus. It would just be ineffective to play him because you couldn't pull off the damage that you could with a full max Q or full blight stacks Q because he's moving around and you wanted him to have that movement speed on his Q or wherever. And I don't think it's the best bet. But here's another idea that I thought of and a few other people have thought of, is using Varus's ult, giving it a little bit faster tether range, or giving it a longer tether range so you just don't move 2 seconds out of there. Look, and I'm out of Varus's ult. Here I am, and I'm out. Giving it a longer tether range would be nice, so when Varus hits the first initial person that you don't move 2 steps and all of a sudden, or 2 boxes within the game, and all of a sudden you're out of the Varus ult and it becomes ineffective. Also, either having the snare go faster to one another, having the snare go jump from person to person faster, where it snares somebody and then goes to the next person and then the next person without, having much time to react and not having oh, there's this purple thing. Let me move away, you know? And last but not least, you could just have them longer snared and ultimately snare multiple people, which would be an interesting idea, but I don't think it would ultimately work. They would have to be like in a line. But pretty much, you throw out your snare and it would snare, depending on how many people you snare, you can ultimately have a longer snare range. If you only snare one person, it lasts for this long, but if you snare up to 2 people, it only lasts this long. Something to that extent, but I don't think that would happen because that would kind of ultimately change his kit. But overall, I feel like the community and Riot itself has endorsed this play where it is you need movement, you need to be safe, you need to always be moving. If you have this movement speed, this is the route you want to go. This is the meta game that we're in, and ultimately these are the champions we'll be making for it, and they fit the meta right off the bat. And I don't think, like I said, Riot can do their part, but I also think that the community has to break away and kind of, think outside the box and use the actual champion kit and or champions' strengths and weaknesses to ultimately benefit or strengthen a champion without giving them movement speed, without giving them, kind of some kind of this great mobility and the safe play that they need to have, because I think it would ultimately take away from the champion, and ultimately it would not be, you'd give up You would give up a little bit of damage for movement speed. It's hard. It's hard for Riot to understand that, and it's hard for the community to grasp it because I said once again, it comes back to Riot. Riot endorses this meta of play safe, movement, all this. And then the community, when they're thinking about fixing a champion, it's always got to be about movement speed, or they got to have some kind of play safe mechanism to them. And one example that I can give that is in the meta right now and really effective champion that really doesn't have much mobility. She has CC, but no, not really much ability, and that's Annie. Annie right now, the only way she really has mobility is for her to flash and Tibbers, or flash and stun, or flash and do whatever. Other than that, you have to get pretty close to Annie to ultimately be pretty much screwed. But you use Annie as a good example is that her kit really doesn't have movement speed. It's not like she starts popping on E and all of a sudden she's like running at you. Like, no, no. She has her kit and she's good with her kit, and the only way that she really can get into a fight and really engage into a fight is through a flash. And I think that other champions can be just as successful without having adding movement speed and adding, like I said, whatever the case may be, to have this like safe play mechanism in a factor in our mind to be ultimately a great champion and ultimately fit within this meta. And I think Varus is one of those. Like I said, you can incorporate things to his E, you can incorporate different things with his Q. Like I said, Riot's already trying to reduce the cooldown while you're loading back on the Q. You can change his ult. I don't think we should always result in movement speed and whatnot to a champion, because there's champions that are not really in the meta right now in our eyes. In NA, of course, in Korea it's different, but in our eyes, one example would be Victor. Victor has great movement speed. His Q, if you upgrade his Q, you get movement speed, you get a shield, and you walk away, right? Well, in North America, you never really see anybody playing Victor mid lane, if not at all. Victor played at all, and in Korea right now, he's one of the top picks. And if we fall down that meta, if you that safe movement speed kind of ordeal, Victor would fall into that category, and he'd actually be a very effective pick. And I think you would actually end up seeing him at Worlds, but that's for a different topic. But that is it. I didn't want to rant too long on this. I know it's 16 minutes. I apologize for the time length. Thank you all, and you all have a good one, and I will see you next Sunday, or next Monday, depending when this is up. Bye, guys.